The man in the elevator. I have never trusted elevators. There's something unnatural about them, sealed boxes that rise and fall through narrow shafts of concrete and steel, carrying us between spaces that should never be so easily connected. Stairs make sense. They show you the distance you are traveling. They make you work for it. But elevators, they hide the transition. They cheat time and space. That night, in the year 1930, I had no choice but to take one. The building where I lived was not old, but it had a strangeness about it. I rented a small apartment on the 22nd floor, though the place seemed higher than any 22 floors should allow. The windows looked out on a skyline I never fully recognized, as though the horizon itself shifted with each day. The lobby was always too quiet, the walls polished to a mirrored sheen, reflecting my figure in ways that seemed slightly delayed. The elevator sat in the center, framed by heavy brass doors that swallowed the light of the hallway lamps. Each time the doors opened, I caught a smell I couldn't quite place, something metallic, something damp. That night, the corridors were deserted. My footsteps echoed like the tapping of a typewriter. I had returned late from my shift at the archives, my hands still smudged with dust from forgotten files. The clock above the concierge desk had stopped at 11, its second hand trembling but never moving forward. I pressed the elevator button. The doors opened with a sigh, and I stepped inside. The panel of buttons was ordinary enough, though some of the numbers were worn nearly smooth, as if touched by countless fingers. I pressed 22, and the doors closed. The elevator shuddered, as though reluctant to carry me, then began its slow ascent. I leaned back against the mirrored wall, watching the dim reflection of my own face. My tie was crooked, my hair disheveled, but it wasn't the familiar fatigue in my eyes that unsettled me. It was the sense that the reflection lagged by a fraction of a second too long. The floor indicator above the doors ticked upward, 3. 4. 5. The hum of the motor was steady, but beneath it I swore I heard something else, faint scratching, like nails on the inner wall of the shaft. By the time we passed the 14th floor, the scratching had stopped, but the air felt heavier. The dim light above me flickered, painting the walls in shadow. The indicator ticked, 18. 19. 20. Then the elevator shuddered, halted, and the light went out. I stood in the dark, the silence pressing against my ears. For a moment, I thought the power had failed. But then, faintly, I saw the glow of a number above the door. It wasn't 21. It wasn't 22. It was 23. But there was no 23rd floor. Not in this building. The doors slid open with a slow, reluctant groan. What lay beyond was not the familiar hallway of my apartment level. The air was colder, tinged with the smell of wet stone. A dim corridor stretched ahead, lined with doors that looked far older than the rest of the building, their wood swollen and cracked, numbers carved rather than printed. The wallpaper peeled like shedding skin, and the lamps on the walls glowed with a faint yellow haze, though I saw no wires connecting them. I should have stayed inside the elevator. I should have pressed the button to close the doors and forget what I had seen. But curiosity has a way of bending reason. I stepped forward. The floor beneath me creaked like old timber, though I knew the building had been built entirely of concrete and steel. I walked slowly, each door I passed bearing a number I did not recognize, symbols instead of digits, some of them curling like handwriting I could not decipher. The corridor bent to the left, and when I turned the corner, I froze. There was a man standing at the far end of the hall. He was tall, dressed in a dark suit that seemed untouched by dust or decay. His face was pale, almost luminous in the dim light, and his eyes, they fixed on me with an intensity that rooted me to the spot. He began to walk toward me. His steps made no sound. When he reached the threshold of the elevator, he stopped. His lips parted as though he meant to speak, but instead of words, there was silence, as though the air itself swallowed whatever sound he tried to make. Then, after a pause that stretched far too long, he whispered, "You finally came back." The words chilled me deeper than the cold air of that place. Back? I had never been here before. At least, I didn't think I had. Before I could respond, the man stepped past me and entered the elevator. He did not press a button. He simply stood there, staring at me, waiting. The doors began to close on their own. I should have stayed outside. I should have let them shut. But some force, curiosity, fear, or something else entirely, pulled me forward. I slipped inside just before the doors sealed shut. The man never moved. The lights inside flickered again, and in those brief flashes I thought I saw the man's reflection in the mirrored wall. But his reflection was not synchronized with his body. It moved too quickly, or too slowly, tilting its head when he stood perfectly still. By the time we reached the 10th floor, I could no longer tell which figure was real. Mine? His? Theirs? The elevator continued downward, past the lobby, past the basement, into levels I had never seen marked on the panel. B1. B2. B3. At B7, the doors slid open. What I saw beyond them was not a hallway. It was not stone, or wood, or anything built by human hands. It was a cavern, vast and echoing, its walls glistening with moisture. In the distance, faint shapes moved, too far to make out clearly. The man finally turned his head to look at me. His eyes were not pale anymore. They were black. "You know the way," he said. But I didn't. At least, I don't remember knowing. Still, something in me stirred, something like memory, like recognition, as though I had stood in that cavern once before, long ago, and had only forgotten. The doors began to close again, slowly, sealing that impossible view behind us. And as the elevator sank deeper still, I realized with a terrible certainty that it was no longer carrying me home. It was taking me back. Back to wherever I had once belonged.
If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next one. Thanks for listening.